Professor Ilya Shapiro was a professor. I say was because he has just quit. And we're going to look into why. This is a guy who was the head of the Georgetown Law Center for the Constitution. He's the author of a book called Supreme Disorder. Competent scholar, and I wouldn't even say a conservative, slightly right of center. When Biden said he wanted to pick a Supreme Court justice based on race, Ilya Shapiro basically objected. And as a result, he was kind of hauled up under charges for a tweet in which he questioned Biden's decision to sort of racialize the court selection process. Evidently, after a kind of witch trial, he was cleared on a technicality. The dean, a guy named William Traynor, said, all right, well, in this case, we're going to let it go. But they nevertheless said this is a very harmful tweet that this guy has put out. And they made it very clear that it didn't matter what his intention was or whether he was making a legitimate point. The very fact that people were offended or claimed to be offended was enough for him to have violated the sort of anti-harassment policy at Georgetown. And in fact, they went on to say that if he made similar remarks and created, quote, a hostile environment based on race and gender, he would have to be disciplined. Now, Ilya Shapiro goes on to say, well, what does this really mean? Let's say the Supreme Court issues its ruling as expected, overturning Roe v. Wade, and he supports it. Obviously, someone can just jump up and down and go, well, he's denying women's humanity. He's making her feel unsafe. He's threatening her with violence. Or if the Supreme Court, as expected, strikes down Harvard's race-based admissions policy. And if Professor Shapiro goes, well, that's actually consistent with the Constitution. The Constitution does not really allow racial discrimination in favor of blacks or against blacks, in favor of whites or against whites. Well, suddenly all these students in Georgetown could say is these comments are antithetical to the diversity that we see at Georgetown. After all, that diversity has been created by affirmative action. So Professor Shapiro is creating a hostile environment for us in class. Or he says, if in a class I'm teaching, if we're discussing whether or not somebody has to, let's just say, be compelled to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, even if we have normal arguments back and forth on the two sides, he goes, the very idea that somebody could make an argument for not baking a cake is insulting to LGBTQ members in the classroom. It's to treat our brothers and sisters as second-class citizens. It's to create a hostile classroom environment. So basically what Professor Shapiro says is that his mere exercise, not just of free speech, but of his carrying out his intellectual task as a professor and as a teacher, is now being deemed a form of harassment. And he goes, if you really think about it, who's harassing who? He goes, it's the Georgetown administrators who have created a hostile work environment for me. In other words, it is becoming very difficult for him to do his job under this kind of a witch hunt atmosphere that they've created at Georgetown, of all places. In 2020, Professor Heidi Feldman of the Law Center, she tweeted this: we have only one political party in this country, the Democrats. The other group is a combination of a cult and an insurrection supporting crime syndicate. And basically what she's saying is we're a one-party state. And says Professor Shapiro, wait a minute, she's implying that Republicans in her classroom are somehow illegitimate. They don't even have a legitimate party to belong to. They're just a cult. And so talk about creating a hostile work environment for conservative and right-leaning students, and yet, where's the punishment for Professor Heidi Feldman? Where's she hauled up before charges? Nothing of the sort. She prudently deletes the tweets later, and nothing is even said about it. No. Here's Professor Josh Chaffetz. He's talking about the protests at Supreme Court justices' houses. And he basically says when the mob is right, some, but not all, more aggressive tactics are justified. Now, I don't think Professor Chaffetz, when he says more aggressive tactics, is talking about the guy who tried to kill Kavanaugh. But nevertheless, the very fact that he thinks it's okay to go to these justices' homes, it's okay to harangue them and harass them at their homes, some types of sort of mob aggression are okay. Again, talk about creating a hostile environment. Again, this guy's not disciplined, not. So what you find at Georgetown is that they are okay with their types of mobs. They're okay with their types of extremism. And Professor Shapiro essentially has had enough. So he goes, I'm out of here. I think he's joined the Manhattan Institute in New York, where he's going to become a scholar there now. But you see the way here in which universities are being emptied out of professors that are not woke, that are not going to go along with their propaganda. And this bodes very badly, I think, for the future of higher education.